My brothers and sisters, we open our hearts and our minds to the good news as proclaimed by John. There was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, how does this concern affect me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servers, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish ceremonial washings, each holding about 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told them, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." They did as he said. When the head waiter tasted the water that had become wine without knowing where it came from, although the servers who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then an inferior one. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this at the beginning of his signs at Cana in Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples, they believed in him. The gospel of Christ. Praise be to you, O Christ. Please be seated. So good morning, everyone. Missed you all last week. So this past Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, and is the beginning of the season of Lent. Lent doesn't belong to a tradition or a denomination within the Christian churches, one over another. Lent has always been celebrated from the very foundations in the beginning of the church. And the reason for that is that at the end of these 40 days, we as a community, not just us here, not just you who participate from a distance, but the entire Christian world celebrates and remembers, recalls, relives, and claims for itself the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is the foundation. The passion, the death, the resurrection of Jesus is the foundation of who and what we are as Christians. If Jesus doesn't rise from the dead, if there is no death and no resurrection, then our faith is really in vain. But from the very beginning, the very essence of our church, of who we are as a people of faith, we have always simply held these 40 days as being special, sacred, different than every other days. It is meant specifically to have us focused so that by time we get to celebrate Holy Week, we're all sort of aware and sensitized to what exactly that week is all about and what that week means to each and every one of us. Now, we have to give it, a little bit of a joke that from the very beginning of the church and celebrating coming Easter, we've all sort of required 40 days. Like somehow it takes us some time as human beings to sort of focus and to get our act together. And so from the very beginnings of the church, it was always understood that we needed sort of 40 days to get together and figure out and focus on exactly what this Holy Week, what this Christ event was really going to be all about. We started with, and again, this is not a denominational thing, and the reason I'm saying that is many people have texted and emailed in the course of the week asking questions about Ash Wednesday, whether Ash Wednesday was just for Roman Catholics or just for certain Protestant groups. No, I mean, the purpose of ashes goes all the way back to the biblical times when kings or sinners in any way, shape, or form, if they were reforming themselves and repenting, they would sit in ashes and cover their head with ashes as an outward sign that they were repenting for something that has happened or some activity in their life or somehow whatever it was that separated them from God or being disobedient to what God has asked of them. Ashes has been a fundamental to Christianity because it's a continuation of what our Jewish brothers and sisters have and recall very often in the Hebrew scriptures. So we start with Ash Wednesday and then we travel through these weeks. Now, this is where I, jump in and start talking about my M&M the candy, M&M, my M&M sermon. See, so every year, and for those of you who have been coming for the last 21 years I've been here, I always mention the M&M sermon. Now, the reason for the M&M sermon is because Lent brings with it a discipline. The church asks us, we challenge ourselves to try to find ways that we draw ourselves closer to God or to one another. And so many times, the first thing everyone thinks of, well, this is great. You know, my New Year's resolution didn't go so well, so I can do a new 40 days of a discipline and give up candy or cake or cookies. In my case, as I am an M&M addict, it would be M&Ms. The problem is with all of this is if giving up M&Ms doesn't draw you closer to God or to your neighbor, don't bother. It's not about us. It's not meant to be about us. It's meant to be about redirecting some aspect of our lives that we would like to be more attentive, focused, centered on either God or our neighbor. Any type of discipline we might or may not choose during Lent, you know, if it doesn't accomplish those goals, then we really need to reassess and reconsider what that is. And so a lot of people have asked me, you know, a bunch of stuff this week about, you know, whether it's candy, do I give up TV? Do I not listen to the radio? I mean, look, if those items or activities are being filled in with activities that bring you more time with God or more time with your brothers or sisters, then that's perfect. If they're not doing that, then let's just all move on. Now, the one thing you will not hear this Sunday in any church, in any Christian church across the entire world, I think, is this gospel from John about the wedding feast at Cana. See, I would like us to consider fasting in a different way this Lent. I would offer this to you as a new way of considering what it is that you're going to give up. And for that, I needed this gospel in order to accomplish that. Now, we're very familiar with this story, right? Jesus is at a party. He's at a wedding. Kind of cool, right? He's there with his disciples. And these weddings go on for a long period of time, you know, probably almost a week. Don't you wish we could bring those back? And during that week, you are eating and drinking pretty well. And it's an entire neighborhood family event where everyone's coming together, and it's quite the celebration. So what generally happens is you need to have enough food and wine to provide for all of your guests for all of that time. And somewhere in the midst of this celebration, this wedding feast ran out of wine. Totally unheard of. I mean, imagine going to a celebration and not having any liquids or any fluids at all. But imagine a culture that is focused on, you know, great food and good wine as part of the celebration, now all of a sudden running out of wine. And so if you notice, mom comes over to Jesus and says, they're out of wine. Now, Jesus at this point in John's gospel, hasn't done anything and really hasn't spoken much about what his mission or ministry is. He's still gathering to himself disciples. So the disciples are there, Jesus is there, and he's there, and mom comes up and says that this has happened, and he's sort of asking, well, you know, I'm not the caterer. Like, what does this have to do with me? Notice mom, typical moms, she never answers the question. You know, she never answers him about what this has to do with him at all. She just turns to the servants and says, listen, do whatever he tells you to do. And then I'm sure she just walked away. Because she knows as a mom, you're not going to not do what I'm telling you to do. And so Jesus goes ahead and tells them to go ahead and fill the jars that are there. But the jars are there for ritual cleansing. So every time these guests arrive at this wedding feast, and when they enter the house or the space, you know, they have to ritually purify, which means they need to take water and they need to pour it over their hands. And also there's the washing of the feet. So you need a lot of water because you have a lot of people. So you have these jars there. And so Jesus says, fill them to the brim. And they go ahead and do that. And as we know, this becomes the first miracle in John's gospel, where this water becomes wine, and ultimately the wine then is presented to the head waiter, and the head waiter recognizes that the quality of this wine is unprecedented. And what he's basically saying there, if you ever think about it, is he's saying, you know, what most people do is they serve the good stuff first, and then when people are drunk, they serve the cheaper versions so that they wouldn't know the difference because they've already had so much to drink. But this wine is superior. This is great. It's unheard of that the best would be served last. And as we know, this is Jesus' first miracle. I would like us to fast this Lent of always having to do things our way and to be in control. I would like us this Lent to give up having to do things our way and being in control. I believe this is Jesus' greatest miracle. And people have argued, how can you say this is the greatest of miracles? In John's gospel, Lazarus is dead, laying in the tomb for 3-4 days. Jesus comes along and raises a dead man and brings him out of the tomb. Jesus feeds 5,000 men, which probably means there's probably about 10 or 15,000 people in this field with just 5 barley loaves, 2 fish. He takes those, multiplies them, and feeds the multitudes. How can you say that this is the greatest of all? It's the greatest of all because Jesus doesn't ask for the jars to be filled with what is ultimately the foundation of wine, which would be grapes. He asks for them to be filled with water. He takes something that absolutely does not have the capacity to become wine of its own. And by God's interaction, by God's presence, and by God's command, then water becomes wine. He takes something that shouldn't in any way, shape, or form turn out to be the best of wine. And I'd like us to do that for ourselves this Lent. See, whenever Lent comes up, we always think this is all about us. Okay. Part of the issue is the fact that we recognize we're all sinners. And we're all broken. And we all have areas of our life. Everyone has areas of our lives that we need to work on. Everyone. And you know, honestly, from now to the day we die, we'll always be working. We'll always be improving. But you know, honestly, say for myself, and those of you who know me, know this is true. I'm not an amazingly patient person, okay? Just not. Thank you for laughing, Cecilia. Very nice of you. I'll remember that when your check comes around. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, I'm not an amazingly patient person. And as much as I may try to be all of that, I sometimes think that I get in the way of what God should be doing. Because if it's not already part of me, then I need God to step in and take some other part of me and convert it into this patient person that I would like to be. That I would like to have this capacity to be a little bit slower, a little bit more, trying not to get things done so quickly, try to, just pace things out. But of my nature, I don't naturally have that. And of course, when we look at ourselves and we try to change any aspect of ourselves, how we look at people on the street, trying not to beep at the people who are ahead of us getting out of the parking lot of the Stop and Shop, trying to, whatever it is that we're trying to correct, most of us recognize that it takes an enormous amount of energy for us to try to do that. But I'm wondering if the purpose of this gospel is to let us know that, sometimes there's nothing for us to do. if we but trusted that God has the capacity to make and create aspects of our lives, to fill the voids of our lives, the struggles and the challenges of our lives. Listen, this also goes for fear and anxiety. It also goes for areas of loneliness. There is a lot in the human condition that is lacking. And sometimes, as much as we try to fill that in ourselves, to create that reality in ourselves. And there's all this positive thinking, right? If you think this, then it's going to happen. And we know that after a while, when we try all that stuff, it doesn't really work. We still end up being the same people we are because we're created this way. And by nature, we're sort of broken. And it doesn't seem to be a problem with Jesus hanging around with us as broken people, but somehow we are much, much harsher on ourselves than God is, than Jesus is. And I think maybe this gospel reminds us that we don't need to have everything in place. We don't need to have all the components to become what it is that we want to do or feel that we're called to be. That ultimately all we need is what? Jesus' presence. It comes down to Jesus' presence. The water turns into wine. Why? Because Jesus is there. It's Jesus' command. Now, I will go back to this and say to you that there is some work that we need to do on our part. I'm not simply saying that we sit back and we just say, okay, I'm just going to sit here. God, you do whatever you need to do. I'm not saying that. Because what does Mary say to the stewards? Do whatever he tells you to do. Right? Which means that we, as Christians, as people who should be in regular conversation and relationship with Jesus, as human beings, because that's what we are. It means just talking to Jesus about our struggles, our challenges, our difficulties, and also listening. Listening's part of a relationship. I'm married 20 years, and I try. I try very hard to listen. I do. And I'm probably better at the talking part than I am the listening part. But in every relationship, we are required to listen. And the very same way with God. It's the very same way with God. As much as we talk to God and we go to God with all our challenges and difficulties and anxieties and even our joys and the happinesses of our life, how often do we really stop and listen? And yet Mary makes it clear, do whatever he tells you. And so during this season of Lent, I would like us to do more listening and to allow the changes that we're hoping for in our life to come by the hand and at the command of Jesus. Because I think we have this all backwards, that somehow we're required to do X, Y, and Z. But the fact of the matter, even if we accomplish those things, by whose grace is it that we have accomplished these things? It's obviously from the grace of Jesus. It's from the grace of God. So why not start there? Why not start at that point? Why not this Lent in those areas of our lives that we would like to change, those areas where we struggle and have difficulties, and we all do, and we all recognize that we're all redeemed, but at the same time we're all challenged by God to become Christ-like, to be as much Jesus in our world as we possibly can. And we all realize that when we compare ourselves to Jesus, there's a lot of areas that we need to work on. And it doesn't seem to be a problem with God, so I want it to be okay with us that we're always in process. But the point is, who gets it done? I'm not sure this is our activity. I'm not sure it's something we do. I think it's something that we listen, we follow what Jesus is telling us, but always, all through the entire process, it's not about us trying to accomplish it. It's about us allowing Jesus to accomplish it. And the problem that we all come across is that when we look at ourselves, we see that we don't have all the pieces. We don't have all the components, that we are broken, we are frail. We're never going to be able to do this, right? I mean, giving up M&Ms for 40 days? Really? I mean, there's just no way this is going to happen. But I think this gospel reminds us it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be about us. What it has to be about is Jesus. And isn't that the whole purpose of Lent, is to keep us focused so that by the time we get to Holy Week, and by the time we're sitting with the disciples around the table and we share in the Eucharist, as we will here in just a few minutes, and as we're at Calvary and we're looking upon Christ who they have crucified, as we're watching and reliving his body being taken down from the cross and laid in a tomb, and then the glory and the amazing mystery of the resurrection and what that means for all of us who are believers. It's all about Jesus. So maybe this Lent we give up the need that we have to do things our way, and that ultimately it has to be our choices and our direction. And maybe instead we replace ourselves with Jesus, and we trust that in the very same way Jesus took something that should not be something else in changing water into wine, in the very same way Jesus can do the same with us. I think that's the loving personality that Jesus is. And I think that's the reason for the gospel, is to remind us it's not always about us. It's always about Jesus. God bless you.